All right, so we've talked a little about the history of computers, history of the internet. Let's talk about how does the internet work? Okay. A lot of people, I think since this class is about web production, we're going to be doing HTML and CSS, starting HTML tomorrow. It helps to understand how the internet works, because I think that makes what we do a little bit easier. Okay, so the main thing to understand about the internet is it's a net or a network. Okay. What is a network? Well, let's start with something that we all have, which is a social network. Okay. So here's me, and these are all people that I know. These are people I know from work or my job, or I know I said that twice actually. Friends of friends, family members, friends from college, that kind of thing. So I know Jimmy, I know Joey, I know Tommy. To know me, your name has to end in Y. That's just a rule. Sally, all right? So I know all these people. Imagine this is like a party, okay? And everyone's kind of talking with each other. Sally can talk to Jimmy, Jimmy can talk to Joey, Joey can talk to Sally, Sally can talk to Tommy, so on and so on, okay? That's a social network, right? You know someone who knows someone else, that sort of thing. A computer network is basically the same thing, just replace people with computers, okay? So instead of Sally and Jimmy, we got computer A, computer B, computer C, computer D, computer E, right? Computer A can talk to computer B talks to computer C talks to computer D, so on and so on and so on and so on. All right, so how exactly do they talk? Well, in the old days, and by the old days, I mean basically prior to 2000, the way that they would talk, the way computers would communicate with each other or connect with each other was through phone wire. Okay, this is typically referred to as dial-up. So basically the same technology that let's imagine, I know nowadays every phone doesn't have a cord, but eventually there is phone wire. If you live, you can see telephone poles and see wire that goes into people's houses and buildings. Like there is wire, even if it doesn't literally connect to a phone anymore. Back in the day it did. But essentially the way it worked is like if I picked up a phone and said something, my voice would be converted into a sound signal that would travel the wire and come up to the other side and get sent back from my signal into voice at some point, okay? And computers basically did the same thing. So if you see a really old computer, a lot of old computers actually had a phone wire port in the back of it where you would plug in phone wire or phone jack, and you could connect your computer to the phone line or the phone infrastructure, okay? And so, if, one computer could send a signal or basically some sort of command like, give me this file, or I am giving you a file, and it could travel over the phone line, okay, to the other side. What happened around late 90s, early 2000s is we got something referred to as cable/DSL. What cable basically was is the cable company, the company that brings you, if you still have cable television, brings you cable TV. Now, if you still have cable, you know that there's a cable that goes into your literal house or apartment, and it plugs into the back of your TV, or it may plug into a router, which we'll talk about. Okay. Sometimes this is referred to as DSL. Essentially, it's the same concept that computers can be connected to this cable line to send information back and forth. The difference between it really is that cable or DSL is much faster than phone wire. Okay. Now, without getting into like the specifics about really why that is, essentially, phone wire goes the speed of sound, and cable wire goes the speed of light. And light is faster than sound, So what that basically means is that cable is faster. What does that mean? Well, basically it means that we can send files faster between computers. I can send multiple files, or have multiple files going on at the same time. Essentially, the way I like to think of it is, think of dial-up like a two-lane street in a city. Cars go one way, cars go the other way. And think of cable kind of like a highway. The reason why highways are so much faster is more lanes of traffic can go in one direction. And so just more cars can go. And that's kind of what cable is. Its speed allows more information to go faster. Okay. Now you're sitting here going, well, okay, that's great, Dave, but I don't have cable or Wi-Fi or dial-up. I have Wi-Fi. Okay, well, let's explain how Wi-Fi works. To understand how Wi-Fi works, we first have to understand how a radio works. Okay, so if you live in a city, there are local radio stations, right? And there's something called a radio tower. Looks like this. Okay. And radio stations broadcast their signal through the tower. And wherever the point is, the radio waves, it sends it outward, and it kind of just keeps going like a ripple in a water. It just kind of spreads. Okay. Eventually, what's going to happen, so if you live in a city, you can access the radio on your car, or if you have a radio, you can access if you're within that area. Okay. Now, eventually what happens is radio waves die out. They're not strong enough to keep going for infinity. There's something called decay. Okay. So as the radio waves keep progressing, they get weaker and weaker and weaker until eventually your radio can't, your car, your radio can't pick them up anymore. Okay. This is why if you were to say drive from the Bay Area to LA, eventually you wouldn't be able to pick up any Bay Area radio stations because the signal would not be strong enough to reach all the way down to Los Angeles. Okay. So what does this have to do with Wi-Fi? Well, you probably have something in your house called a router. What a router does is a router converts internet signals into, it actually does a lot of things, but one of the things it does is it converts internet signals into a radio wave. Okay. So what happens is you have your internet coming through as cable or dial-up, probably cable realistically, and it connects to your router. It's that little box that usually sits in your kitchen or your living room or something like that. And if you ever look at your router, there's like a little antenna on it. Looks like a little radio tower. That's what it is. It is a radio tower. And so essentially what happens is your signal comes in, it gets converted into a radio wave. And if your computer or your smartphone or your tablet is within this area, then you can pick up the signal, okay? And then you can access the internet. This is why if you have really thick walls in your house or your apartment, sometimes it's harder to pick up your signal because the radio wave is literally bouncing off of the wall. It's also why you can't pick up Wi-Fi typically if you're underground, like in a cave or a tunnel or something like that. It's also why when you leave your house, like you can't, the farther you get from the house, the less you can pick up your signal. The same reason why you can't pick up a radio station. The signal decays or it dies. All right. So remember how I said, this goes back, we talked about, there's these computers and it's a mesh system. There's all these computers. And I can, a computer can send a file through any of these computers that goes down the pipe. Well, the way computers send files is they actually break them up. So the way it works, actually want to do this live. So when a computer sends a file to another computer through the internet, it doesn't send the entire file. What it does is it breaks the file down into smaller bits called a packet. Okay. Each packet goes along the system, and each packet actually gets numbered. So imagine, this is packet 1, packet 2, packet 3, packet 4, packet 5, packet 6. You get all these packets, and then as they're sent through the system, when the other computer receives it, it starts putting them together like a jigsaw puzzle. It goes, oh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and it makes a solid image. Okay. All right, let's talk about some key terms when it comes to internet. So the internet is the ability for computers to send files back and forth through the mesh system. Okay. There's different kinds of things your computer can do. They're not all necessarily website related. Okay, some of the things it can do is it can send an email. An email is not a website. An email is sending, we all know what email is. It's digital text that's sent through one computer to another. So that is something the internet will allow. It also allows for what's called file transfer protocol, also referred to as FTP. FTP is basically the ability for one computer to send a file to another computer. This could be text, could be an image, could be a video file, could be an application file, any sort of thing. There's also something called voice over IP or internet protocol. Sometimes it's referred to as VoIP. VoIP is essentially what this is, Zoom. It is live streaming video or audio. So that is what allows for things like Skype, Zoom, Twitch, things like that. Basically streaming media, okay? And finally, one of the things that internet can do is what we're going to be doing in this class, which is create websites or web pages, okay? A website is a digital platform on the internet that contains information. So, a website is like yahoo.com, youtube.com, netflix.com, something like that. It's a place that stores things like images, audio, video, articles, all that good stuff. All right, so that's the internet. We also have what's called an internet service provider. This is sometimes referred to an ISP. An internet service provider is the company that gives you access to the internet. For most people, especially if you're in the United States, that would be your cable provider. Okay, so if you live in the Bay Area, you probably get your internet through either Xfinity, which is a cable company, or Sonic. These would be your ISP or internet service provider companies. Another thing we have to understand, and this is going to come up later in the semester, is this idea of a server. Okay, a server is relevant to when we start talking about websites. And a server is a computer that serves other computers' information or files. Okay, so let's say I'm just going to go to, let's just use Diablo Valley College, this website. Okay, so Diablo Valley College's website has all of this information. There's text about COVID, there's some pictures here, there's some other registration stuff, right? All of this information. These are what we call web pages. Those web pages have to be stored somewhere that other computers can access. Remember, this goes back to, it always goes back to computers talking to other computers, the mesh. Okay. So where do we put them? Well, we put them on something called a server. Okay, why is it called a server? Well, think about a server in a restaurant. If you go to a restaurant and you sit down, you're not allowed to just like walk into the kitchen and take whatever food you want, right? You have a server and they come to your table and you say, I would like the salad, I'd like the soup, I'd like the steak, whatever it is you want. And then they go to the chef, they get the food and they bring it to you. Okay. So for a website like say diablovalley.com or dvc.edu, I should say, all of the files for that website have to be stored somewhere that we can access, that we can get access to. And that is stored on a computer, and that computer is referred to as a server. Okay, so a server's job is other computers will try to connect to it and get information from it or get files from it. Files like, this picture, this text, this web page as a whole. This is the information that we're trying to get from the server. I want to talk about something called an IP address. An IP address, also known as an Internet Protocol address, is the location of a device on the internet. Okay, so let's go back to this mesh. I always go back to it. So here's this mesh. These are all different computers, right? This is someone's smartphone. This is someone's tablet. This is someone's desktop. This is someone's Xbox, so on and so on and so on. There are all these computers that are on the network. And let's just say I want to send a file from one computer to another computer. How does the internet know which computer is which? Like, how can it tell my computer from my next door neighbor's computer? Okay, so on and so on. Well, the way it does this is with what's called an Internet Protocol address. Think of an Internet Protocol address kind of like the address that you have where you live. Your home address, you live at 123 Main Street, Anytown, USA, that's your address. That is where people can send you mail and bills, and that's in theory where people can find you. An IP address is the same idea, but for a device. Okay, so if you have a computer, you might want to see what your IP address is. I can show you really quickly on this Mac. If you go to your system preferences on a Mac, if you have a Mac computer, and you wanted to see what your IP address is, you could go to network, and then I'm going to go under advanced. Actually, take that back. Sorry, actually, there's my internet address right there. So my Internet Protocol address is 192.168.4.21. Okay. You can also do this on things like smartphones, tablets, that sort of thing. How you get access to it depends on the particular computer you have, particular device. This is on an Android phone, how you might do it. You might go under about phone status, and there's usually an IP address. So this is the location of your device on the internet. Okay, this is how people know where to send files to you, or how if one computer from another part of the world is trying to send a file to you, how they can get access to your computer. We talked about a router before. Router, when we talked about it, is what converted our signal, our internet signal, into a radio wave so that our smart devices and wireless devices can access it. It also has another purpose. Okay, what it does is it routes or it sends information. The best way to think about this is, let's say I live here in San Francisco. My parents live over on the East Coast in Connecticut. If I wanted to send a letter to them, I would put the letter into my mailbox, and then that letter would go to the local San Francisco branch, and then they would take that mail and pass it to the next branch, which is probably like in, Nevada or something, and it would probably ping pong its way through America. It probably stops in like Pennsylvania to New York, and then New York would send it to Connecticut, and then the local Connecticut post office would give the mail to my parents. It doesn't just magically go from my mailbox to their mailbox. There's a lot of stops in the way where they look at the mail and go, oh, this is where it should be going. The same idea is, excuse me, with a router. The router's job is to send information. So for instance, if I'm trying to send a file from my computer here in California to a computer on the East Coast, the file needs to know where to find, it's going to use that internet protocol address we just talked about, and it needs to be able to get there. So it sends the file through my local router, which is in my house. That router sends it to another router, which then sends it to another router, which then sends it to another router. And then eventually their local router, it'll send that to, and they get access to it. So it's very kind of similar, so the router's job is basically, like it sounds like, to route information or send information so that it all gets to its appropriate location. All right, last topic we're going to talk about is the World Wide Web, WWW. So before we talk about the World Wide Web, I want to talk about the concept of building a house. Okay,